Hi, guys, and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. I am joined by my rad co-host, Amy Hollenkamp, RD.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. So today's episode, we're going to talk about blood sugar, particularly as it relates to the gut and IBS and SIBO and everything in between. Amy, let's kick it off. Blood sugar, kind of a big deal, eh? That's kind of like a foundational big deal breaker for a lot of stuff, but gut health included, wouldn't you say?
For sure. And I do think that it's more looked at and understood when there's like major blood sugar dysregulation in the conventional space. So
Yeah.
a lot of the conventional docs know that if someone has diabetes, it could affect gut function in major ways, especially like the nerves within the gut being damaged by blood sugar swings. But I think there's a lot of people that don't have that severe of blood sugar dysregulation, but still have blood sugar issues to where it really affects their gut. So I think like there's a lot of understanding in the conventional space, but I feel like in the functional medicine space and integrative space, people might touch on it, but I don't feel like it's really touched on enough. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, pretty frequently. I think that it's tough because we're in such a sugar addicted society. And like on the
Right.
one hand, we have people who are really sugar addicted and carb addicted, and those people could probably use some restriction in that sense. But then there's a lot of people who are like, I have Candida or I have SIBO and I can't eat a carrot because it has carbs, right? Or I can't eat
Right.
whatever. And it's like those are the people where it can get really tough to have these conversations because I don't want to send somebody down the rabbit hole of restriction more than I absolutely need to. But yeah, I do think that both hyper and hypoglycemia, being high blood sugar and low blood sugar, is a pretty big deal breaker for the body in general, let alone the gut. And you hit the nail on the head with the nerves and the motility in the gut being a really big focal area.
Right. And I love that you're bringing up the two sides of the coin because the standard American diet that's really high in carb, sugar is definitely going to lead to more blood sugar swings. But I also think concurrently in the SIBO space, if you are cutting a lot of carbs and going to the extremes in that way, it could lead to more blood sugar dysregulation, which I don't think's talked about enough.
Hmm.
So if you're going low carb and you're having blood sugar dysregulation, sometimes people will even cut more carbs thinking that
Yeah.
it's going to help, but it
Yeah.
could just be adding more stress to the system and more blood sugar dysregulation. So
Yeah.
I think the answer isn't always to cut carbs wise. And I think that's what you were getting at when you were
Yeah.
like, we work in this weird SIBO space where so much focus is on starving things out. Um, but I do think that going down that rabbit hole could make blood sugar dysregulation much worse. So I did just want to point that out too. And we can go into more detail on all this stuff for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and I think maybe a good way to organize our thoughts for this podcast is to start out with the high blood sugar, like insulin resistance side of the coin, and then swing back over to the hypo, or we could do vice versa. But I do
Right,
think that both can be really detrimental, and they both kind of come with their own quirks and their own like physiology states, and they
right.
can have different treatments. But like to start off, this episode makes me think of a patient that I'm working with right now, and it was probably a story that you've heard a lot too. She came and found me because she'd been to the GI doctor, got diagnosed with SIBO, thought, hooray, this is the answer. They put her on rifaximin or Xifaxan, I forget which, and she felt good. And then the SIBO immediately came back. And then they did another round of antibiotics and she felt okay. And then it came back. And after a few rounds of the antibiotics, she was like, okay, well, clearly it's going to keep coming back. And she was getting really frustrated. And that's how she found me. And we were the first people, together to talk about the idea of root causes, like why do you have SIBO in the first place and what things are keeping you stuck. And one of the big things in her history was that she's a type 2 diabetic.
Mm,
And I don't know if you've noticed this too, working with people with type 2 diabetes specifically. The conventional medical world has different standards for blood sugar and A1C that they expect type 2 diabetics to adhere to. Like, I'll never forget, it was a couple years ago, my father-in-law was like, yeah, my doctor says that my A1C is great. And I'm like, oh, cool. What is it, Paul? And he goes, oh, it was down to 7.0. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh God,
Yeah.
that's not good.
Yeah.
He's like, well, my doctor says that that's good for a diabetic. And I'm
Right.
like, why are we holding them to different standards than normal humans? I don't get that. But, I think by her knowledge and from her conventional team, they're like, oh, your diabetes is well managed. But her fasting glucose was still high.
Right.
Not like in the 200s, but it was like in the low 100s, like 120, somewhere in there for fasting. And she's on several medications for diabetes.
Hmm.
And, it's like clearly there's something still going on with your blood sugar because A, you need these medications, and B, your A1C and your fasting glucose are not normal. And we had a really big conversation about, I know you're doing a pretty good job on the blood sugar front, but you might have to be more strict or more meticulous or really get a better understanding of your glucose. Because if you have high glucose levels, if you're still insulin resistant or hyperglycemic, that's going to fry your nerves. And among the nerves that we care a whole lot about, that will be a detriment to the nerves in your intestines that regulate motility. And then that's where you're getting the SIBO recurrence from.
Right.
Um, so I've definitely had cases where I'm like, like, bro, or I don't know, bro, I don't know. Like, we need to be much more stringent about the blood sugar thing. And I do think it could be like maybe not a SIBO root cause in the sense I don't know if diabetes would be enough to cause SIBO intrinsically, but it could definitely keep you stuck and prevent you from
Right.
fully treating the SIBO, if nothing else.
Right. I've never worked directly with someone with type 2 diabetes and SIBO,
Mm,
but I'd almost venture to say that it could be a root cause in and of itself. Like again, it's hard to know for sure, but
yeah,
if it is kind of frying those nerves,
I think it could be.
and I know like things like gastroparesis are really common
Hmm.
in so there's going to be an inherent motility issue if
Yep.
you have wildly uncontrolled or even not wildly like still uncontrolled glucose levels
Yeah.
in type 2 diabetes. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think if you're someone that has diabetes and it's uncontrolled, it's going to be really problematic.
Yeah.
And usually I would say like even with type 1 diabetes, I think even then, again, if you're having these uncontrolled swings,
Yeah.
it's going to still create a lot of problems gut wise.
Yeah. Agreed.
Um, but I also think like an interesting thing about blood sugar is the idea that, gut imbalances can drive blood sugar swings as well. Or if the gut is imbalanced and dysbiotic, it's going to cause a lot of inflammation if there's leaky gut
Yeah.
there, and these endotoxins are seeping through the blood,
Hmm.
causing a lot more inflammation, a lot of this low grade chronic inflammation. The term used is this metabolic endotoxemia
Hmm.
term, which is basically saying that you have endotoxins seeping out into the blood and they're affecting your metabolism in a negative
Yeah.
way. So I do think that there's a lot of interconnections of like how the gut could drive some blood sugar swings,
Hmm.
but also vice versa. If you're having blood sugar swings, it's going to affect gut function. So there's like a lot of interplay there, um, too. And I always wonder with things like type 2 diabetes as a whole, not even in the SIBO space, type 2 diabetes, a lot of these chronic issues like cardiovascular disease, um, uh, diseases that affect the metabolism in big ways, how they could potentially be connected to gut function, even if they're not having
Oh
gut
yeah.
symptoms.
Yeah.
Um, and there being this blood sugar effect in those particular conditions.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the endotoxemia thing is a really great thing to touch on. And to a point where, I forget if I mentioned it in a recent podcast. I just put the paper away and filed it away, but there was a really great meta-analysis. I think it was a 2019 paper where they were looking at basically like what symptoms or what conditions or what risk factors are actually associated with intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut. And that's the thing that's really going to set the stage for this metabolic endotoxemia. If the
Right.
gut is leaky, then more crap gets through, and that crap can entail bacterial endotoxins and fragments and little bits and pieces from your microbiome. So, leaky gut is very, very associated with quote unquote metabolic conditions like type 2 diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease to some extent. And it's actually less associated directly with things like, IBS, IBD. There's an association, but it's not nearly as strong. The really big heavy hitters, if you want to know if you have leaky gut, is if you have hypertension, high cholesterol, metabolic
Right.
syndrome, diabetes, insulin resistance. Like that's the kind of stuff that really is the humdinger. So I do
Right.
think that there's a very strong link with these metabolic impairments and leaky gut or endotoxemia or both. And then there's also, they're trying to develop Akkermancia muciniphila probiotics, mostly because it would be beneficial for type 2 diabetes. There are some papers now that are suggesting that if we could develop an Akkermancia probiotic, and there is one on the market now, I don't know how good it is, but if they could develop an Akkermancia probiotic, that could be a treatment potentially for diabetes or metabolic syndrome, which I think is really interesting.
Right. It's mind blowing to me that there's such a strong connection between leaky gut and what's going on in the gut and these chronic conditions that are, I mean, huge in our country. And I think because I went through the conventional route,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of my friends and cohorts that I went to school with are working within these populations. Um,
Yeah.
and I think in the conventional space, no one really owns the microbiome. Like, I guess
Yeah.
potentially GI docs might think they do, but they don't know enough about the
Meanwhile,
microbiome.
they don't order poop tests, so
Right, exactly. So no one's really owning the microbiome. I think that I wish that dietitians, there was a stronger connection being made between the microbiome and chronic disease. And I think it's slowly coming, but I
yeah.
do think in order to make really big changes in the chronic disease world, we need to make that connection and start working on gut function. And I think it's hard to make that connection because they might not have any gut symptoms,
Yeah.
but yet they have terrible gut problems that are underlying some of their chronic diseases. So that's a hard connection to make.
It's really wild. Like the longer I practice, the more I'm astounded that the human body is so resilient. And yeah, there could be people with really wild gut problems that are basically asymptomatic, or
Right.
like progressed cancer that's like, you don't detect it until it's way like, my uncle had a weird rare tumor and they didn't detect it. They didn't know he had cancer until it was the size of a melon,
Oh my
like
god.
a fairly good sized melon. Now, granted, he was overweight and it wasn't his abdomen, but still, like the guy was carting around a melon sized tumor. And to give
What kind
UNC
of
Chapel
melon
Hill credit,
we
I
talking?
mean, I remember him gesturing like,
Okay.
I mean,
Like a cantaloupe?
yeah, like a decent sized cantaloupe.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I mean, to UNC Chapel Hill, they treat it. That was years ago. He's been in remission ever since. But it's pretty wild how resilient the human body is. And I've seen cases like that where, at first glance, you don't think somebody has gut problem, and then I just follow my clinical intuition, and I'm just like, well, let's test some stuff and see what pops up, and then
Right.
then treating the gut ends up being a big answer for them. Um,
Right. Right. I also think, I mean, I remember something in maybe a Datis Karazian book. I'm trying to remember
hmm,
where he even said sometimes if the nerve endings aren't super together, like you might not have any pain, but still have a lot of inflammation.
hmm,
And I think like in some of those conditions, there could be some nervous system or brain gut axis issues not really registering
yeah.
as pain within the gut from a
Hmm,
brain and nervous system standpoint.
hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I just wish there was that connection being made. And I think we'll probably get there. It's just going to take a lot of
50 years.
time. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I hope that the dietitian profession starts to really claim some responsibility for the microbiome with dealing with a lot of
I mean, if you're dealing with
food
food.
and exactly. I mean, probably the one of the biggest ways to manipulate what's going on in there is food, and if you're not working on that at all and that's not on your radar, it could be really problematic.
Yeah, no, I think that the nutrition profession broadly should be all about the microbiome, and some are, to their credit, but it's not broad across, not
Right.
in conventional settings at least. But to go back to that, I will share, and I think that we talked about this before we hung up from our last podcast when we were just chit-chatting. I became really interested a couple years ago in the idea of continuous glucose monitoring for non-diabetics even. And there was a study out of Israel, I forget how many years ago it was, maybe 2015, right. 2016, where they were looking at, I believe it was a cohort of people with type 2 diabetes, if I remember correctly. And they looked to see when they were continuously monitoring their blood sugar, so like every 5 or 15 minutes or whatever it was, looking to see, all right, when you eat this meal, do you get a spike? Like if both of us today ate white rice, maybe the white rice would throw me way off and make my blood sugar go way high, but then your blood sugar, not so much. But then both of us sit down for another meal and we both have white potato and I'm fine and your blood sugar goes through the roof. So there's this idea that yes, you could eat lower amounts of sugar or, low glycemic or even keto, but there is some individuality to people's blood sugar responses. And this has been really freaking cool to start observing. But that study, they basically concluded that like some people can eat a sandwich with white bread and it does nothing to their blood sugar, and some people get a big spike, and some people will eat, sushi or white rice and get a big spike, and some won't. And what that study did was that they looked at the microbiome and they said, all right, can we correlate it with something that we're seeing in stool testing? And they did. So then they did another study, like within, a year or so later, where they took another cohort of type 2 diabetics. They did stool testing first, and then they tried to predict their blood sugar patterning based on the stool test. And they, to at least some extent, were able to successfully predict using stool tests. So then, of course, they came out with a commercial product and a stool test that you could purchase for like $300.
Right.
I got one of those. We were one of the first people to order that. I got one on my husband, and I was not impressed at the time, at least. Maybe they've updated it since then, but I wasn't super impressed. But I liked the general premise of, oh, hey, the blood sugar response to food can be very individualized. And now I have gotten in the habit of, certainly with type 2 diabetic patients, but even, patients who are trying to figure out their blood sugar and they just need to collect more data. I've had people go to their primary care or their OBGYN or something and request a prescription for a continuous glucose monitor. And actually now to the point, I'm wearing one. There we go. I'm wearing one right now. And it's really fascinating and insightful to collect this kind of data and see just what things mess with your blood sugar and what doesn't. And I know I've been texting you my pictures every morning, like, look, my blood sugar dipped at 4:00 in the morning. What is that about? But it's really fascinating to see that. So that's actually something, I think the Libre, the one that I got, the Freestyle Libre, the unit itself was like $80. And then the doodads that go on your arm are like $60 a pop. I think I got them for 2 for $60 because I had a good RX coupon. So it's actually fairly cost effective. And this is something like for that patient with type 2 diabetes, I recommended that she ask for one of these as a prescription. Because it can be really insightful to just get a sense, like maybe you think you're being really good and diligent about eating low glycemic, but those, gluten-free cookies or whatever it might be is wreaking more havoc on your blood sugar than you otherwise would have thought. Or maybe there's a surprise food that you think is okay, like brown rice, and it's really messing with your blood sugar more than you realize. But that's something I've been kind of excited about in the last couple of years, especially. And I've seen some patients get really profound, useful data collection from doing that. And it's been really insightful for them.
Really cool. No, I think that's a really good tip of, if you're wondering if you are having some symptoms of blood sugar swings, and we can maybe go into what that would look like. But if you are like doing some self-exploration isn't out of the realm of possibility of you doing on your own. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Um, I think the continuous would be awesome. I'm interested in trying that on myself. I've done finger prick stuff,
Hmm.
which again,
Gets old after a while.
yeah, I mean, there's only so much you can prick your prick your finger. And I think too, if you're trying to get like really complete data, it's hard with the finger prick
Yeah.
comparatively to the continuous glucose monitor.
Hmm.
Um, but I think what you're saying is a really good point about the individuality of the blood sugar response.
Yeah.
I know in the dietetics field, there's a lot of talk of the glycemic index, which I think's kind of being blown up right now. And in that research, what you were describing,
Mm.
it's not really showing that that's a really effective way to manage. It's a very individual
Yeah.
type.
It's a starting point.
Right, right. And there's going to be variance between individuals.
Yep.
But most of what's done in the conventional space is carb counting,
Mm.
which is honestly like the most unintuitive, the unintuitive like program for people to do, just because instead of using like grams, which I think everybody could understand, and I still don't even think like even if you're counting grams, everyone's carb needs might be different within
Yeah.
the community, but yet we have these very almost protocol like levels of like, okay, if you're this person, you're gonna have two carb counting that, or
Hmm.
you're gonna have two carbs you can eat at this meal. But it's just so unintuitive, the carb counting. I don't want to get
Yeah.
in the weeds with it, but
Yeah.
it's like learning a different language for people, and it's not overly complicated, but it complicates it more than it has to.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that you know, just really making sure that you're listening into how your body's responding and things like not going to get many calories, so I need to really preserve these and use them efficiently. That's going to cause some symptoms, but your body's really trying to help you operate as best as you can. So you're totally right. The body's so crazy how it does have these protective mechanisms in place, but they can create some other domino effects that aren't great. Yeah,
you and your body are on the same side. It's just, sometimes that feels hard to believe, but all day, every day, your body just wants to be happy and healthy and not inflamed and balanced and like do what you want it to do. It's just oftentimes your body is struggling in some way and it needs some help, and it might need a little bit of a nudge from a multitude of different areas, but I want to give the body credit. And I think that's something too, like conventional medicine definitely is guilty of this, but honestly, even functional medicine, this drives me crazy about them. Like this whole idea of like, you're insulin resistant and that is bad and that is not appropriate and we need to whack away at the insulin resistance. Or you have high estrogen, that is bad, that is inappropriate, we need to whack away at the estrogen dominance. And SIBO, like you have SIBO, that's bad, let's just obliterate it. It's like, well, at least on some level, trying to understand, why did the body do this? Considering that your body's not just going to sit there and think like, let's really screw with Amy today.
Right.
Let's just fuck shit up. Like your body's not doing that. So if there's going to be a logical explanation, like at least have like a nanosecond in the clinical process where you try to understand where the body's coming from.
Right.
And then it's not a matter of like, oh, bad body, tisk, we need to just whack away at stuff. It's like, well, how can I show the body that it's safe and nourished and protected? And how can I coax it over here to the less inflamed, less dysfunctional side of things? And we're not trying to shove the body in the direction that we want it to go in. We just want to help the body process things and like assimilate the world around it better. And I think that is true with blood sugar also. There is this element of like, if you're eating Skittles and like Coca-Cola and Pop-Tarts every day, you need to stop. Like that's not doing you any favors. But if you've been fighting against your body for a long time and you've been thinking like, oh, this is a bad, inappropriate response, I mean, maybe you just need to look at it from a different angle and think like, what is my body burdened with? Is it endocrine disrupting compounds? Am I overburdened or getting exposed to some chemical man-made shit in my environment? Is it that I'm actually deficient in a nutrient like thiamine? Is it that I'm deficient in carbohydrates and I'm like swinging back and forth between super strict low carb to eating literally like cupcakes and donuts on the weekend and then super low carb? You've got to kind of tease it apart and figure out what your body actually wants. And I would say this too, I don't know if you've observed this, I think also if you eat at irregular, unpredictable intervals, and if you are sleeping at irregular, unpredictable intervals, that can throw off your blood sugar in a big way too. And that's something like one patient comes to mind, we've been talking about this a lot with her, and it's taken a while to stick, she's working on it, but like, this particular patient will do intermittent fasting, and I'm kind of using air quotes with this. She'll do intermittent fasting and not eat anything until like 2:00 in the afternoon, and then eat dinner, and then maybe have something before bed. And then like the next day, she'll eat at a totally different time of day. And then like when we started working together, one of the things that came up for her is that I need you to like eat at regular times and have like a designated breakfast-ish time of day within like an hour window, and a designated lunchtime and a designated dinner time, and like try to have consistency in your schedule. And also with sleeping, because she was like sleeping at really erratic times. And still, even out, like she'll be really strict for like a week, and then she'll kind of go off the rails for a week, and then she'll be really strict for a week and then go off the rails for a month. But I do really think from personal experience and also from like book learning and reading, your body needs to anticipate, oh, I need to make some insulin now, I better get ready because she's going to eat any minute, and oh, I need to make stomach acid, or oh, I need to make whatever. So if you can try to eat and sleep at approximately the same time every day, yes, even on the weekends, and it kills me to say that, then I think that's also going to be really impactful for your blood sugar so that your body can finally figure out what the heck you're doing and anticipate the demands that you're placing on it. But I have seen that be really helpful. Even if you don't change the content of the food you're eating, if you eat the same stuff and you just make sure that you're eating breakfast around the same time and lunch around the same time and going to sleep around the same time, even that could be pretty profound.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I think of it as like circadian rhythm
Yeah.
optimization, if you
Mm-hmm.
want to kind of put a word or a phrase around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see that being problematic with people. I've had one or maybe two. There's been two like night shift workers that I've
Mm,
worked with, and
it's rough.
definitely hard to have consistent sleep times because I mean, optimally, you want to stay on the schedule if you're working at night. You want to stick to a schedule, even if it's like kind of bizarre, but people have life and like parties and things that they have to do. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily realistic. But night shift, I mean, with the circadian rhythm disruption is going to be really problematic gut wise, but also blood sugar wise and
Yeah.
like balancing your stress response. So definitely huge there. I think another dietary component that we haven't talked about um, is protein. I think sometimes if
Mm.
protein's a bit on the low side, there tends to be some more blood sugar imbalance,
Hmm.
what I've seen. Um, or again, like if you're eating breakfast and it's like traditional, more traditional style American
Wheaties.
breakfast, yeah, where it's all carbs,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not really balanced well. So I think the balance of the meal plays a big role in the blood sugar regulation. And some people might be different where they can eat, you know, higher carb and a little bit of protein, like they feel better on that route. Like, so I don't think it's set in stone on what works for everybody, but I do think there's like usually a certain level of protein that I want to make sure someone's hitting if they're having some blood sugar issues.
Yeah. And I think my guess is that it's probably a combination of like the buffering effect. Like
Right,
if you eat
right,
just pure sugar or pure carbohydrate, it's going to get absorbed real quick. But if you could buffer it with some fiber or fat or protein,
right.
it'll be absorbed slower. I also wonder too, I mean, you need protein to make hormones like insulin, and hormones usually get carted around in the bloodstream on carrier proteins. So probably some of that also has to do with how well you're able to make your hormones, make your carrier proteins, and actually make receptors, because receptors are just big old chunks of protein usually.
Right, right.
So maybe that has something to do with it too, like the actual utilization of the hormone as well.
Yeah, definitely could be. And I think fiber is a big one as well that you had mentioned being a
Hmm.
buffer in slowing how the carbs are being processed.
Yeah.
Um, Fiber is just something that's so low in the standard American diet, and I know we're probably going to talk about fiber until
Yeah.
forever, for forever.
That'll be another
But
episode too. Are you noticing a pattern? We
yes,
need separate episodes for so many things.
exactly. But I think that the fiber, I know when I was in school, the number that got thrown around was like the average American eats 15 grams of fiber a day, which is
Gosh.
low, low, low.
Yeah.
Um, so I do think that in the SIBO space as well, SIBO and IBS space, fiber can start to dip low because fiber is so hated
Yeah.
in the IBS and
Well, the
SIBO
low
space.
FODMAP diet. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. And sometimes people can like make do on low FODMAP and still get enough fiber, but it's rare that I see that.
Yeah.
Most of the time when I'm reviewing things like chronometer data
Hmm.
and looking at their diet, they're maybe slightly better than the standard American, like maybe, you know, in the high teens, low
Yeah.
20s is typically what I'd see fiber wise.
Hmm.
Maybe again, some are low, like I've definitely seen like 10 to 15
Oof.
grams too. So it's just something I would pay attention to if you've been in the SIBO space, and that probably is in line with how high your carb intake is, because usually if you're eating more carbs, you're probably going to be eating a little bit more fiber as well.
Yeah.
But fiber is definitely one in the SIBO space. If you're having some blood sugar issues, another nutrient to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is definitely an area where like the idea of like balanced meals can be really helpful, just conceptually, like the idea of having a bit of carbs, a bit of protein, a bit of, fiber, a bit of fat.
Right.
And that way, A, you're getting a wide range of nutrients, but B, you are getting that buffering effect so that your body isn't getting bombarded with any one nutrient excessively. Same thing, like, the whole saturated fat, endotoxemia thing, like if you eat just saturated fat, and I'm calling you out, keto people and carnivore people, if you eat just saturated fat, you're probably ripping open your gut and causing a lot of leaky gut and endotoxemia. But if you eat the same thing, but you eat it with a plant food that has some fiber or some chlorophyll or whatever, that doesn't happen nearly as much.
Right.
So that's a whole nother topic we could do. But yeah, I think any one nutrient or any one food in excess has the potential to be problematic. Not because the food is intrinsically unhealthy. It's just that we need balance, and our microbiome, our microbes need balance, and it needs variety to thrive. And you can't bombard your body with any one thing. I think that concept is really important.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up. It's so funny. The quote or saying that I have in my head, scenario, is something that Laura Schoenfeld said, where it's like she was talking about her clients. Like a lot of her clients would eat a plate full of bacon, and that was totally okay. But eating a half of a banana is a no-go because too much sugar. So I think like anytime you're in an extreme mentality where, a half of a banana is like the devil's work almost.
Yeah.
And you're willing to just eat a crap ton of bacon, and that's okay. That's healthy. I think if you get yourself into those mindsets, it's not really a balanced mindset or gonna create balance in the gut, in the body in general. So
it's a slippery slope.
It really is.
And it's not, I enjoy bacon as much as the next person.
Me too.
But, balance it out with some carbs and some fiber and, like heck, we'll do pancakes and bacon sometimes at my parents' house, and I'll try to throw like blueberries in the pancakes or put like strawberries on top. I'll try to balance it with something that has color at least. Even if it is kind of a shit meal, all things together, maybe we do better at lunch and maybe that's just our treat for breakfast. Have bacon and pancakes. But
yeah, of course.
I think the balance thing, either within the individual meal or balance across the day or across the week, is really important. And I think the thing that I'd like to wrap up on, because I want to be cognizant of time, I know you have an appointment to get to, is are you familiar with the term nutritionism?
I am not.
Oh, okay. Are you familiar with Michael Pollan's stuff at all?
You've definitely thrown some stuff around, and I'm familiar with him, like basic. I have a basic knowledge base on Michael Pollan.
So I have such a crush on him. I really like the way he delivers nutrition advice and speaks about it, acknowledging that he's not a nutritionist, he's not a dietitian, he's like he was like a New York Times writer, and then he just got interested in nutrition. But he didn't coin the term, but he used it in one of his books. I forget who actually coined that term. Nutritionism is this idea that nutrition is too complicated and the individual person can't figure it out, and you need experts like us to teach you and tell you what you're allowed to eat. And like I just had a patient yesterday, literally, she came to pick up supplements and she brought some wrappers of stuff. She's like, is this okay for me to eat? Is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I mean, sure. Yeah. What, like, I mean,
so like every one of my clients.
Yeah. And we have been taught for a while now that, science is complicated, nutrition is complicated, the gut is complicated, SIBO is complicated, whatever it might be. And we're just lay people and we can't figure out what to eat, and we need We need to catch up with the latest studies, the latest publications, the latest New York Times bestseller, whatever it might be, the latest podcast. And we need to listen to the experts to figure out what to eat. And so much of the time, I'm trying to tell people, no, like, you could listen to your body. I think most humans have an intrinsic sense, even if you're like really unplugged and you never got taught about nutrition in your life, most people have a sense of direction of like, broccoli is probably better for you than a Pop-Tart, as an example. And then from there, there's gray area between those two extremes. But I think that most people have some rough understanding of what is healthier or less healthy. We need to shut out all of the people and the chitter chatter around us and the people who are saying, no, my diet's the best, eat the plate of bacon, whatever.
Right.
And you need to trust your gut, literally and metaphorically. You need to just trust your instinct and your gut. And that's one of the things I like about Michael Pollan. He's a great speaker too, and he's on YouTube. He's got some really good lectures, but he like delivers a lot of this kind of stuff in like a very down to earth, oh duh kind of a way.
Right.
And I remember, a lot of my patients, I have multiple copies of Michael Pollan's books in my office, and I literally send it home with people and from my lending library. And I'm like, just read this. One of his books is a really quick read. Or I'll send them, YouTube videos. I just want to start getting people out of their own head and out of this, like, I have to listen to the experts mentality so they can connect into that intuition and just eat freaking food again. But I really like that. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that science isn't done yet, and science is never going to be done. We're going to continue to discover things. We're going to continue learning about the microbiome and carrots and something else. So, like, don't ever hang your hat on science and think that science will tell you 100% of what you need to know. There's some degree that you need to trust your instinct in nutrition, in overall health promotion, sleep habits, happiness, even herbal medicine, like the way that we've used herbs for thousands of years might be really important to know. Even if an herb is poorly studied in medical literature, if we have data going back thousands of years on how to use a particular herb, maybe we should trust that at least a bit.
Right.
But anyway, that's like my little soapbox. But I do think acknowledging that is important, because so many people become carb phobic and go, specifically, I've seen that a lot, people who go into the carnivore diet. I think every patient I've worked with who's been on carnivore, actually, that I could think of, has told me in some way, shape, or form that they're confused and they're frustrated and they don't know what to eat. So carnivore on some level is easy because they don't need to make a lot of decisions. They just eat meat and that's it, and they're done. And I think I think that carnivore is thriving to the degree it is because so many people are fearful of food and confused about food and just frustrated. And there's like 8,000 different diets you could follow. And at some point, these people just say, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to eat meat. I'm going to eat one thing and be done with it. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you're saying about how we're making nutrition way more complicated than it needs to be. It's so funny to me because a lot of the cultures that are the healthiest, these more primal cultures that were studied like by Weston A. Price, like those sorts of scenarios where we're looking at ancestral populations. And again, how healthy they are, and they don't have any information that's really clouding their judgment on nutrition, and they're eating widely different foods among different populations.
Yep.
That to me is amazing, because you could have people eating, 70% carbs, 20% fat, 10% protein, and are really healthy. They don't have any chronic disease within that population. And then you could have someone eating 70% fat, 20% protein, and 10% carb, and be very healthy. So, I think those are the most interesting examples of just like, the culture eating a specific food composition and that working for for them. They're getting all the nutrition they need, and it's not complicated, and no one's telling them what to do and what to eat. And they're
have less anxiety and PTSD around their freaking food.
Right. And they have less chronic disease just as a whole, a lot of the cultures. So yeah, it's really fascinating to me, kind of the evolutionary approach to eating versus like how we're eating now, which is just wild to me.
Yeah, and I think to wrap up on that point, I think that Michael Pollan likewise sums it up really beautiful, and that is to say, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So, and he draws the distinction between food and modified food-like products. And, so for example, like margarine, and I always pick on Pop-Tarts, but, margarine and Pop-Tarts and Cheetos and soda pop, like those are good examples of modified food-like products. They're technically edible, but they're devoid of nutrients and they're processed and full of crap, versus, carrots and broccoli and cucumbers and onions and things that actually came from the earth, and meat and fat. And I think, that one Michael Pollan book, the whole point is drawing that distinction between what is food and what is not food. And, is it something that your great-great-grandmother would have recognized as edible? Yes? Right. Cool, eat it. No? Grandma wouldn't know what a Go-Gurt is?
Yeah.
Probably don't eat it.
I do think, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think that with the modified foods, they're doing stuff with flavoring to make you think you're eating certain things when you're not. So like even flavors, like there's a good book called The Dorito Effect. Have you read that book?
Ooh, no, I like the title though.
But it's essentially like how, like if you eat a Dorito, there's flavors that kind of trick your mind, like, oh, you're eating tomatoes because there's tomato flavor, there's garlic, there's onion. So there are like things that your brain's processing as something that's good, but then you get none of those nutrients. So sometimes the flavor in the food could be hijacking your brain in ways, making it more addictive. I don't really want to say necessarily totally addictive. I don't know.
I think companies are trying to make their food addictive.
Okay. Yeah. I don't love like, I don't know, considering like Doritos or putting them in the same realm as like drugs, which I know people do. Like, or sugar, especially, like sugar is like as addictive as cocaine. Like I never like making those connections, because to me, again, like I think that you can't really put those in the same category.
Yeah.
But I think there is an addictive quality to it, and then it just messes with your feedback loops with your body if you're getting a lot of flavors that, the system recognizes as something different. It's a really interesting book. I'd recommend it. The Dorito Effect is what it's called.
Well, if nothing else, it makes me want Doritos, not going to lie. I haven't had a Dorito in a lot of years because I forget what exactly they have. I think they have dairy in them, and I can't touch dairy with a 10-foot pole. But I ate many a Dorito in my day.
Me too.
So, yes, they were pretty scrumptious. But I think, weird note, though that may be to end on, my fandom of Doritos, and also that they're probably atrocious for us, I think that's basically a wrap. So I guess, if I was to summarize, again, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Don't overcomplicate nutrition if you don't have to. Obviously, like there are people who wind up on these low carb diets for various reasons. And if you're feeling stuck, then certainly work with somebody who's qualified and understands what you're going through and can help you navigate how to introduce those foods. And if you are, either hypo or hyperglycemic, just know that there are things that you could do to facilitate normal insulin signaling and normal glucose regulation. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can cure your type 2 diabetes. You can cure your hypoglycemia. It might take time and it might be a pain in your ass, but you could do it. And I think both of us, it's so convenient actually that both of us had the opposite scenarios, where you had the hyperglycemia and I had the hypoglycemia when we had gut struggles. So we definitely can speak from experience there. As always, guys, if you are watching us on the YouTube, if you could click the like button, the subscribe thing, leave a comment. We're always open-minded to new ideas and new topics, so let us know what you would like to hear about. And obviously, click subscribe to the channel. That will help us reach more people. And if you are on a podcasting app like iTunes or Spotify or any of those, if you could go ahead and rate us 5 stars, that would be super helpful. And again, it helps us reach more people and keep the podcast going and ultimately change the world, because this stuff needs to be talked about. And I'm so pumped to be doing this podcast with you, Amy. And I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll catch you on the flippity flip.